effective. It was a system that worked inside Sparta remarkably well for 2 centuries. But then, for reasons that are not entirely clear, Sparta began to look outside its own borders for new people to conquer. Perhaps the war machine was in danger of growing rusty from disuse. Perhaps they were simply itching for a real fight.
The Spartans confidently thought that their 2 great adversaries, the Argives and the Tegeans, would be pretty easy to defeat.
And they're now ready to expand, as it were, to bring more territory within the same system.
At the same time, there was a real threat to Spartan supremacy on the horizon. A nation of more than 1 million warriors, hell-bent on conquering Greece. They were the Persians.
By the beginning of the 5th century, they're going to start first to conquer the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor and then to look toward the mainland. And that's going to explain all of subsequent Greek history for the next 2 centuries.
For generations to come, all of Greece would feel the threat from Persia. How Sparta and Athens reacted to that threat would both divide and unite the Greek world. At the end of the 7th century BC, Greece was a loose confederation of more than 1,000 fiercely independent city-states, each with its own character and reputation. Athens was the largest, with a sophisticated cultural life, great architecture, and an impressive navy. But Sparta, which was revered above Athens by all the city-states around the Aegean, had none of these. Instead, it had sacrificed culture at the altar of war. Sparta was an armed camp.
And that would mean that the educational system is going to be focused more on military affairs. There's going to be a creation of a secret police. There's going to be a disengaging from the rest of Greece for a while. They're not going to send out colonies. They're not going to build a fleet. They're going to be obsessed with this one problem of controlling Messenia.
Since the end of the 8th century BC, Sparta had subjugated Messenia, a country whose population outnumbered the Spartans by at least 10 to 1. They did it through a kind of slavery called helotage, and through a campaign of terror carried out by highly trained warriors. Sparta was the first country to develop what would come to be known as Western military discipline. Modern ideals of drilling, marching, rank and file, and the science of the phalanx assault were all invented by the Spartans.
In this chaotic world of hoplite warfare, the Spartans had learned that people who kept their head, who kept together, who did not allow gaps between them, could create a greater cohesion and defeat the enemy.
Among the phalanxes, the Spartans were the most elegant, the most able to make changes on the battlefield if changes would be needed.
The Spartans also redesigned the armament of war from head to toe. The centerpiece was the 3-foot hoplon, or shield, carried by each soldier. Hence the term hoplite to describe the Spartan warrior and those who would adopt their methods later on. Warriors were armed with 9-foot spears, a secondary sword, a heavy helmet with 2 small openings to see, and bronze body armor.
So the entire ensemble or panoply might have weighed 70 pounds, and then the idea that these men, no larger than 5'5", 120, 130 pounds, would carry half their body weight in the summer seems absurd. So what is the point? And it seems to be a ritually crafted mechanism of determining an entire war by a single half-hour ritual collision between neighboring city-states. And the Spartans tend to master that way of fighting better than anybody.
Battles were decided by quick, decisive, and deadly tactics that relied on teamwork and agility. But for nearly 100 years, this new art of war was more theory than reality. Then, in the 6th century BC, the Spartans weren't content with simply conquering and containing the Messenians. They looked to the north and the city-state of Tegea to further expand their territory. However, Sparta was one of the most profoundly religious city-states in Greece and wouldn't act without a favorable word from the gods. And so, a delegation was sent to Delphi to seek the blessing of Apollo, who was believed to speak through a priestess, or Pythia.
Greek oracles were part horoscope, part fortune cookie, part guesswork, part bribery. People often heard what they wanted to hear. A pilgrimage to Delphi didn't resemble a trip to a fortune teller or a palm reader, so much as it did a journey to see the Wizard of Oz.
Around 560 BC, the Spartans invaded Tegea. Victory was more than simply winning the war.
And then, sure enough, Tegea, instead of being an enemy, becomes an ally, and probably the first ally in a series of alliances which spreads through most of the Peloponnese, and indeed outside the Peloponnese.
By the end of the 6th century BC, the intimidating Spartan machine had convinced a number of other city-states in the Peloponnese to join with them. This powerful alliance became known as the Peloponnesian League, with Sparta as its leader. The goal was to create a force to stand against Athens, not so much to overtake the powerful city-state, but to avoid fighting it.
It's a simple rule that if you have decisive military superiority and the reputation for decisive military superiority, you can actually avoid the struggles. That's the Spartan policy. They very rarely fight, because every time they fight, they know there is a risk that they'll lose.
But an ominous threat from the east would force Sparta out of its insular world. Persia, under Darius I, commanded the largest empire the ancient world had ever known. Among the vanquished were many former Greek city-states, including those in Ionia. However, after several decades of oppressive Persian rule and ruinous taxation, the Ionians plotted a rebellion. In 499 BC, they sent a delegation to meet with Sparta's king Cleomenes. Cleomenes refused to assist the Ionians, a decision that set in motion a series of events that changed the course of history.
Cleomenes' clearness of vision was not shared by all Greeks. The Athenians were persuaded by the Ionians to send some support to the revolutionaries.
Despite the help of Athens, Darius I's powerful empire defeated the Ionians, and Athenian support of the rebels would not be forgotten by the Persians.
And having crushed that revolt, they begin to think very seriously about this upstarts in the West who had dared to interfere in what was, by their standards, an internal Persian matter.
Meanwhile, Cleomenes embarked on a merciless mission of annexing neighboring city-states to strengthen and expand the Peloponnesian League.
The most heinous allegation against him was that when he was attacking Argos, he lures as many, it said, as 6,000 Argive hoplites into a sacred grove. He then orders helots, note, helots, not Spartans, to set light to a sacred grove, which then torches all those 6,000 Argives to death, for which he was put on trial when he came back into Sparta.
The charges were serious, and even the king wasn't exempt from Spartan law. Cleomenes faced the possibility of exile.
What was unacceptable was that this was another Greek city, a sacred grove, and the deception was therefore somehow sacrilegious. Nevertheless, he survived. He lived to fight another day, but he went on under a cloud.
In an effort to prevent his own exile, Cleomenes needed to eliminate the forces within the government that were against him. This meant eliminating his competition, that is, the other king of Sparta, Demaratus. To do this, Cleomenes bribed the oracle at Delphi to declare King Demaratus an illegitimate king. Demaratus was immediately deposed and sent into exile. But Cleomenes' treachery was quickly exposed, and he too ended up in exile. When Cleomenes eventually returned, he died a gruesome death by his own hand.
And the most extreme version is that he committed suicide by slicing himself from the feet upwards until he reached the vital organs.
Cleomenes, who would forever after be known as Cleomenes the Mad, was replaced by King Leonidas, a man who would take the Spartans where they had never gone before, into an ancient world war of epic proportions. At the dawn of the 5th century BC, an invisible line divided Greek city-states into two distinct groups, those that sided with Sparta and those that stood with Athens. While Sparta tried to maintain its hands-off policy towards warfare, Athens began preparing for the possibility of war with the Persians. There was news that Darius I of Persia was hell-bent on punishing the Athenians for supporting the failed revolt by Ionia in 499.
Darius never forgot about it, never forgot about that humiliation. The Greeks claimed that Darius, in fact, delegated a slave to whisper in his ear on a regular basis, "O king, never forget the Athenians."
In August 490 BC, Darius I dispatched a flotilla of ships carrying troops to attack the Athenians. The Persian expedition approached Marathon on the northeastern coast of Attica. It was much larger and better supplied than the Athenians thought they could handle.
When the Athenians realized that the Persians really were coming and were about to land at Marathon, they sent a runner down to Sparta. They had had mixed relations with Sparta, sometimes amicable, sometimes otherwise, but they certainly recognized that Sparta was the great military power in Greece.
As the story goes, the runner covered 140 miles in 2 days, only to be told by the Spartans that sending troops meant disrupting the Carnean festival, a religious ceremony sacred to Apollo. Sparta promised reinforcements when the festivities were over. 10 days later,
the Athenians have to send up their forces. They send every man they can, about 9,000 heavy armed infantrymen, and they square off against the Persian forces, who probably outnumber them by 2 or 3 to 1 at the plain of Marathon.
For several days, the Athenians and Persians eyed each other from afar in the hot August sun. Finally, with Spartan reinforcements nowhere in sight, Athenian general Miltiades ordered a surprise attack on the enemy.
The Persians are cut to ribbons. The heavy-armed Athenian hoplites proved to be more than a match for the light-armed Persian infantrymen, and there's just a massacre. Meanwhile, the Athenians have sent a runner back to Athens announcing their victory.
In the wake of the stunning Athenian success, the Spartans finally arrived with a hoplite force 2,000 strong, but there was nobody left to fight.
When the Spartan army finally gets to Marathon, the Athenians are happy to show them the corpses of the Persians whom the Athenians have handily defeated. So this was something the Spartans had to live down.
Meanwhile, the Persians began plotting their revenge. In 486 BC, Darius I chose his son Xerxes to be his successor. Xerxes carefully planned a new and far more elaborate invasion of Greece, a plan that would take years to put into place.
By 481, 480, it's pretty clear that Xerxes has been mobilizing for a period of 4 years, an enormous force, perhaps as many as 250,000 men in his fleet and his land army, to come down into Greece proper.
And so the Spartans, Athenians, and a small contingent of city-states met to plan a counterattack. They argued over strategy before finally yielding to Spartan Admiral Eurybiades to command both ground and naval forces. It was a challenge he accepted on behalf of all Greece.
One, the Spartans are very arrogant. They say, by God, if these wimpy Athenians could defeat the Persians at Marathon, then just imagine what we, Spartans, can do. Two, the more sophisticated Spartans would say, I'm not all that afraid of the Persians, because although there are a lot of Persians, They are not particularly good infantry fighters, and we're the world's best infantry fighters.
By the spring of 480 BC, the stage was set. On the Persian side, 46 regional contingents under 30 generals were assembled for the invasion of Greece. They were led by Xerxes, known to both friend and foe as the Great King. The massive force numbered between 200,000 and 300,000 warriors.
Xerxes' armies will consume millions of gallons of fresh water daily. It will consume millions of pounds of wheat, fodder, meat.
At sea, approximately 750 warships called triremes were flanked by several hundred supply ships. The vast Persian navy moved in tandem with the ground forces. It was a war machine of unprecedented might, requiring masterful planning and execution at every turn.
The interdependence of the Persian army, the land army, and the Persian navy is really important in thinking about these wars. The army had to stay linked up with the navy because the navy guaranteed the safety of the supply ships.
The Greeks, accustomed to battles involving a few thousand men at most, would soon face an inexhaustible flood of enemy troops. After much debate about what to do, they decided to take a stand at Thermopylae, a scenic spot known as the Hot Gates because of bubbling sulfurous springs nearby. Thermopylae was the gateway to the south. In 480 BC, the pass at Thermopylae was barely 50 feet wide, a spot where Xerxes' enormous advantage in numbers could be neutralized.
I think this was one of those times that the moment was comprehended, that people realized that they had to make a stand, and that if they had not made a stand, the problem would not be that the Persians would just cross this one particular pass, but rather that morale among the Greeks would just sink into the lowest point and they would lose the war.
If the Greeks can hold them at Thermopylae, then in some ways the Persian army will eat itself out of its own home. It's like some great monster that continually has to be fed.
The Spartans were led by King Leonidas, a veteran of many campaigns during his 11-year reign. But to win this war, he would be called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice.
The oracle at Delphi had said that either the king of Persia would conquer Sparta or a Spartan king must die. Leonidas was well aware of this oracle. He was also, I think, aware that if the Greeks were going to put up effective resistance to the Persians after Thermopylae, there had to be a glorious moment. There had to be something to make your heart swell.
With fire in his belly, Leonidas handpicked his men for what was surely a suicide mission.
When Leonidas goes to Thermopylae, he takes with him a royal bodyguard of 300 men. In this particular case, however, the royal bodyguard is specially selected. It is not only selected with regard to the merit of the individuals, it is also selected with regard to the fact that each individual leaves a son behind.
I think that the Spartans knew, and Leonidas knew absolutely, that they were going there to die. That was what they'd been trained for their entire lives. I think they recognized the psychological value of that for the rest of Greece that had been left behind, that they were enacting a kind of a play to inspire the rest of Greece.
To die for one's country, for the Spartans, was the highest form of honor.
In August 480 BC, the mighty Persian juggernaut lumbered to a halt across the sun-baked plain. It was an awesome spectacle of power and might. The Persian army, led by King Xerxes, was immense, at least 200,000 strong. The Greeks countered with just over 7,000 troops, including 300 of Sparta's finest hoplite warriors. Why the Spartans committed so few troops is at the core of the Spartan psyche.
Could they have done better by sending a full force? They claimed that they were intending to. But a religious festival prevented them from sending more than the advance guard. Cynics will say they had no intention of risking a full force because they knew that they were going to lose. They needed a demonstration. They needed some spectacular event. So sacrificing 300 would be absolutely the perfect solution.
The Spartans, under the command of King Leonidas, were prepared to fight to the death. When Xerxes sent a messenger demanding the Spartans lay down their arms, Leonidas replied with 2 words, molon lobe, come and get them.
No greater contrast between the two armies, no greater contrast between the two societies to have Xerxes up on a throne, having his secretaries take notes, while you have Leonidas right out in front of his men.
The mission of King Leonidas was daunting: to stall the Persians long enough for Greek generals to muster their forces at the Isthmus of Corinth. They needed time to mount a full-scale counterattack. If the vast weight of the Persian army was allowed to roll freely southward, central Greece would fall, with the Peloponnese sure to follow.
So the Greek idea at Thermopylae is quite brilliant. It's to force a stalemate and to create logistical problems for this kind of unwieldy army.
When the Greeks arrive at Thermopylae, they rebuild the wall that had been across the pass there. But the notion is that by rotation, they will send out